I hate it, if I'm being honest. I've got a number of messages from people that say, my abuser follows you, my abuser stitches you. And I never know what to say because without knowing the ins and outs of each relationship, like I have no possible way to discern who is abusive and who isn't. And I know that abusers take my content to validate their experience. And the only thing I can say to the victims are, remember that they need to rewrite reality so that they don't have to face it. It's an ego defense mechanism. So I keep trying to rack my brain to pinpoint one thing that would make discernment easier for the real victim. And I believe it boils down to self-reflection and accountability. Victims will internalize blame, they will reflect on their actions, they will question if they did something wrong, and they genuinely try to seek to improve the situation. But abusers will avoid accountability, they will shift blame, and they will manipulate the narrative to make the victim feel at fault. So anytime my ex would come to me with a complaint, I took it seriously. I went inward and I examined it. If there was any ounce of accountability for me to take, I would take it. But I just didn't feel like he did that piece. I feel like he made every thought and every feeling my responsibility to manage. He would ask me to take accountability for things that were not my responsibility to take accountability for. And in trying to understand the way he viewed the world, I realized that there were a lot of fallacies in his perceptions. His upsets were based on cognitive distortions, all or nothings, false assumptions, attempts to mind read, emotional reasoning. And I learned about cognitive distortions the first time I went to therapy. They are thinking errors that are not based on fact or reality, and they are rooted in internalized shame. And it doesn't mean that victims don't have cognitive distortions or that everybody with cognitive distortions are abusive. But we have to develop awareness as to when we're operating from them so that we don't allow faulty thinking to drive our behavior or our decision making. So he would get emotionally triggered, and instead of pausing to reflect on the trigger, he would react abusively. When I would hold him accountable for the behavior, he would describe a thinking error to justify the behavior. So when I would hold him accountable for the thinking error, he would tell me that I was invalidating him and not taking accountability. So simply put, he had no awareness that he was using cognitive distortions, and he was not willing to take accountability for his behavior or the thoughts that were driving the behavior. So sometimes he would acknowledge that his thought or emotion was coming from a past trigger, but he would still try to make it my responsibility to manage. He had trust issues, not because I did anything to cause the trust issues, but because of his past. So he's carrying around these bags of unresolved trust issues, and they were my responsibility to manage. He needed to check my phone. He needed to know who I was texting. I can't be friends with certain people. And I think that this is how a lot of people become abusive, weaponizing their trauma. I have all this trauma, and because of it, I have all these rules that you need to follow so that my trauma doesn't get triggered. Doesn't matter if my rules violate your autonomy. If you don't follow them, then you are invalidating my pain and you are being abusive. And this is a mindfuck when you're on the receiving end of it. But I didn't do that to him. I didn't make him responsible to manage my trauma or my feelings or my thinking. If I got triggered, I would say, hey, I am feeling this way and I need to reflect on it. I need to figure out if my hurt feelings are coming from what you did or if they're coming from something unresolved in my past. And I wouldn't react in the moment, but I would communicate that I needed a pause. And when I would ask to take space to self-reflect, he wouldn't allow it. He would instead try to insert his own narrative that I misunderstood or that I was overreacting. He would tell me that by taking space, I wasn't being open and honest. Or he would throw in other manipulative phrases like, we should be able to share everything with each other. And despite me saying, I'm happy to share it with you after I have processed it, he would say, well, you're just going to end up building a case as to why this is my fault. He was unable to respect my autonomy for space, and I realized this was a tactic so that he could control the narrative of whatever I was feeling. And that's what we need to remember. Abuse is control. Whether it's controlling your behavior, controlling your emotions, controlling the narrative. Behavior is designed to remove autonomy. Your right to make decisions based on your values, your right to feel how you feel, your right to live in your narrative. If you ask my ex, he would say that I'm abusive because he would share his feelings and I wouldn't take responsibility for them. I wouldn't change my behavior or violate my values or drop my boundaries. His experience was the only experience that mattered, and he wanted me to change my concept of self to accommodate his reality. And I would say, I hear what you're asking, I hear what you need, but I can't do that because it goes against my values. So because I wouldn't do it, he would be abusive towards me, justify it, then call me being abusive. So they either don't self-reflect enough to know that their feelings are coming from their own unprocessed shame, or maybe they are aware, but they fail to take accountability to change their thoughts or their behaviors that trigger the shame. In each case, they're making their shame your responsibility to manage.